Hello and welcome to Where the Bush is Burning. I'm your host, Tom Tice. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to have another conversation about Christ. The conversation we're going to have about Christ today has to do with how he presented. Now, we're familiar with the Christmas story. We're familiar with the incarnation. We're familiar with the fact that Christ was born of Mary and that Joseph was regarded as his father, was in fact as his stepfather. But when Christ grew up, he grew up in Nazareth. They spent some time in Egypt when they had to escape the persecution of Herod. Herod was attempting to kill Christ. However, after they came out of Egypt, they settled in Nazareth. So then Christ grew up in the streets of Nazareth. Now, it was the habit or custom of the Jews that when a young man reached the age of 12, that he would begin to enter into his trade. And traditionally, the trade that the young man entered into was whatever trade his father did. So Joseph was a carpenter. Christ became a carpenter as well. And so between the ages of 12 and 30, he was involved in carpentry. Now, I think we probably should remove from our minds the idea that he was making tables and chairs in a carpentry shop in Nazareth. That's not actually. More likely what really was going on was that he was actually going with Joseph down to the construction sites, which were all around the north end of the Sea of Galilee. So they may have gone away for the week, or may have gone away for part of the week, or may have gone back and forth. But at the time, there were a lot of building projects. The Herods were doing a lot of building projects around the north end of the Sea of Galilee. So this would have been a relatively common thing for people who were tradespeople to go to these construction sites and participate in these projects. So it is perhaps more likely that Christ really, between the ages of 12 and 30, was involved actively in the construction trade in these various projects that were going on. Now, what that means then is that by the time he was 30, when he began to preach, he presented as a construction worker. Now, think about this. Of all the things that God could have selected for Christ to come and to become in time in the earth, he could have chosen any number of other things. Could have been a professional educator, a king, a person in any other walk of life other than just a tradesperson. And yet, for God's particular purpose, to accomplish his overall purpose as far as salvation goes, he saw to it that Christ presented as a construction worker. Now, this was quite remarkable. In fact, when Christ began to speak, he began to speak as one who had authority and not as the scribes. In fact, we find that in Matthew chapter 7, verse 28. So it was when Jesus had ended these sayings that the people were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes. So that was the closing remark really at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, that he taught as one having authority and not as the scribes. Now, the fact that he did present in this rather humble way did create issues elsewhere. For example, we read in Matthew and in chapter, this would be in chapter 9. It came to pass when Jesus had finished these parables that he departed from there, and when he had come to his own country, he taught them in their synagogue, so that they were astonished and said, "Where did this man get this wisdom and these mighty works? Is this not the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary, and his brothers James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas? And his sisters, are they not all with us? Where did this man get all these things?" So they were offended at him. But Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honor except in his own country and in his own house. Now he did not do many mighty works there because of their unbelief. So this was in Nazareth. He went back, he taught in their synagogues in his own country, in his own area, and they did not accept him. They didn't accept him because, as they said, he's the son of the carpenter. Implicitly, what they're saying is this person's not been to school. This person's not one of the rabbis. This person is not one of the Pharisee class. So how is it that he teaches with this wisdom and does these mighty works? At this point, he was healing the sick. He was doing rather remarkable things. He was multiplying loaves and fishes and all sorts of things that were considered to be mighty works. And so they did not accept him. In his own country, as he points out, prophet is not without honor except in his own country. And the people who were the hyper-religious, the Pharisees, they did not accept him. Later on, as he would go down into Jerusalem and minister there, the Sadducees, who were the rulers of the temple, who ran the religious business of the temple and all that had to do with that, would not accept him either. So the net result was that his presentation was a very humble presentation, was a very unassuming presentation, and yet it was a very powerful presentation, because here he was, for all intents and purposes, as people would perceive him, a construction worker. And around him he had other people who were gathered, his 12 disciples, who were tradesmen themselves. They were fishermen. Some of them were religious activists, or political activists rather. Some of them were tax collectors who were extremely unpopular at that particular time in Judaism, because they worked for the Roman Empire. So these were the people who were following him, and he was the head of them, and here he was, a carpenter. So his presentation of himself was very, very unassuming. Now, this in and of itself is important in the sense that when Christ began to speak, the people who heard him were the very people who were part of the group from which he really came. The scripture says the common people heard him gladly. The people who had difficulties with him were the highly religious, scrupulous followers of the law, teachers of the law, the church people, if you want to call them that. Those people had no time for him. The other people who did not have any time for him were the people who were making money off religion, which would have been the Sadducees. So these people had no time for Christ. And they despised him. They despised him as one who would eat with these common people, as they used to refer to him, that he was a glutton, and he was a heavy drinker of wine, and that he was a friend of publicans, that is, those who were the tax collectors, and sinners, as the highly religious would have referred to them. So these are the people to whom Christ came, and by whom Christ was most well received. They were the broader stretch of humanity in many respects. They were the people who were really what we would call the lower socioeconomic groups, and those were the people, the common people, who heard him gladly. Now, this is very interesting, because even today it still in many respects becomes a point of discussion. We don't embrace Christ unless we think we need him, do we? And the fact is that we do need him, and very often it's the people who have less, who are discounted in the world, the people who are not the movers and the shakers, the people who are not the more overtly, particularly wealthy. Those are the people who are willing to embrace Christ. In fact, the scripture says that he didn't call the high and the mighty. He didn't call people who were, as far as other people are concerned, exceptional people. But he called the poor, that he called those who were of low estate. And so, as a result of that, we understand that Christ is for anyone who will receive him And very often the ones who are willing to receive him are the people who are members of that particular class or group from which he himself came when he came to represent himself in a particular way. Now, that's important for us because what we really don't want to do is to get into this whole candidates for grace race where we think, well, that person is well off, that person is that person's successful, that person's good looking, that person is going to make a great candidate for grace. Let's zero in on that person. Well, no, we really should not, because Christ came when he presented himself to present himself, and presented himself as an ordinary person, a tradesperson, a person who went out every day from 12 to 30 and worked like everybody else at the construction sites. And when he began to preach, it was that group, those tradespeople, those common people, as the scripture refers to them, who heard him gladly. So it's important for us to understand how Christ presented himself and what the overall effect of that really was. The overall effect was that the people who were the regular people in the world, they were the people who heard him gladly, the common people, if you will. He was a man of the people, presented himself that way. And it's important for us to recognize that this was by his choice, this was according to his purpose, and these were the people to whom he appealed the most. Now, whoever you are, it doesn't really make any difference where you find yourself as far as your status in life. All of us are candidates, if you will, or people who can embrace Christ as the gospel freely offers him. You don't have to be wealthy. You don't have to be particularly smart. You don't have to be particularly well-educated necessarily. You may be, or may not be. It doesn't really make any difference. Christ came presenting himself in such a way so that the most common people, the most ordinary of people, could hear him and receive him and accept him, and did. And it was very, very common or very, very customary for those people to embrace Christ as he was offered to them. So you're not excluded. I'm not excluded. We may ourselves embrace Christ as the gospel offers him. And I would certainly, if you have not, encourage you to do that. Christ is for you. So do, by all means, embrace him as the gospel offers him to you. Now, this is our conversation about Christ today. I hope that you've enjoyed it. If you have enjoyed it, I trust that you will come back and participate again in a conversation about Christ. If you would, please like this video and subscribe to it. That would be lovely. I would appreciate that. If you would like to hear the devotional that we produce, or read the devotional rather, we produce every day, then I would certainly recommend that you go to our blog site. It is called hopeharbor.church, all one word, Hope Harbor, and then dot, and then church, hopeharbor.church. There you can get the devotional that we produce every day. It's called Where the Bush is Burning. It takes about 2 minutes to read it. And if you'd like to get that in your email, you can subscribe through the blog, or you can go to Substack. Substack also is another place where we publish, and you can subscribe to that, Where the Bush is Burning, and you can get it sent to your email. So do please like, subscribe, read the devotional if you find it useful, and come back and join us again on another occasion as we have another conversation about Christ. Thank you very much for joining us today. Christ is for the common person. Christ is for us. And so by all means, embrace him as the gospel offers him, and join us again on another occasion when we have another conversation about Christ.